have some other business over here to attend to.
Some of us have to share on our phones.
Yeah.
Send the reminder to come on.
We don't have to respond. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And if it rings, it's even better. It wakes everybody up. I don't mind. You know that. So one, we have a reminder for those watching this share or any of our shirim on YouTube. If you're enjoying this shirim, please make sure to subscribe to the OUisrael shirim channel so you never miss an update. And we're sharing inspiring new content. So the more people that sign up, somehow it helps in some kind of algorithm. I don't know, the world is controlled by algorithms. I have no idea what any of this means, but apparently this is quite important. The shir for this whole year is sponsored by Michael and Jerry Laxmeter, who could not make it today and apologized. I don't know why people. So I was going to ask to bring a note from their mothers. I don't know, but maybe they were afraid of that. But they wrote me yesterday for the refuah shlema for their granddaughter Abigail Sarah Bat Shena Aharona. She should have refuah shlema. Also, I'll indulge you and ask that the shir also be in memory of my mother, Rivka Riva Bat Nechemia Meir V'Mindel, and also today happens to be the yahrzeit of my mother-in-law. And so I told my wife, she asked about Kaddish this morning. I said that she had both in mind. I said I certainly would. So her name was Bluma Bat Yitzchak Isaac for Rivka. So you got a Yitzchak and Rivka there together. There must be something very biblical that I could say about that. So also it should be Iloi Nishmata. So before I apologize for not having time or bandwidth to actually prepare the share, normally I think about what I'm going to talk about the Shabbat before. You can't hear me? If I say anything interesting, I'll say it louder. Okay? No. Anyone who can't hear me, just put like the thing on louder. Right? Yeah, turn it on. So normally I'll think about what I'm going to talk about the Shabbat before, and this Shabbat it was still during Shiva, so I did not think about that. And then I had Sunday and Monday we got up. So the one thing about Shiva that I noted is that they're very long days and a very short week. Whoever decided it was Shiva could not count really up to 7 because the first day was essentially an hour or so from the time we got back from the Levaya till nightfall. And then we had a couple of days, with 3 days altogether. And then Friday's not a whole day, and then Shabbat's not a whole day, just Saturday night. And then Sunday was a whole day. There were 3 whole days. And then Monday we got up. So I don't know how anybody ever counted to 7. Essentially it was 3, and then a couple of partial days. And I thank everybody who was able to come and those who weren't able to come, who sent messages. And I felt that there was a great deal of honor to my mother for the people that came, the amount of people, some of the people who came really surprised me when the president of Bar-Ilan University came. I'm sure there are many people that teach there. And he told my father, yeah, we work together. And that's not, I guess that's true technically, but the mayor from where I live and council members where I live and rabbis and mentors and students and many students came, hundreds of students came. So it was, and again, I felt that was really approached my mother at the very, very end, the last morning. And I was even thinking of not coming the last morning. I know that sounds strange, but I was sleeping at home and I said, okay, I can dive in the shul and then I could get up and then meet them all in the cemetery. I said, okay, I've been with them all week, I'll go as well. And the very, very last morning, a very, very old, I'll explain how old, and dear friend who used to work with me as well, we worked together, came Rabbi Mordechai Machlis. I assume that some of you know Mordechai. So the Machlises and the Kahns and the Singers and the Schwartzes and a couple of other rabbinic families, all of their fathers were rabbis together in Bensonhurst. And we know the Machlises, I'll say how far back. Rabbi Machlis Sr., his father, Rabbi was the rabbi in my grandparents' shul, and he read the Ksuva by my parents' wedding. So I know Mordechai, I can say, way over 60 years, and I'm not way over 60 years old, but I know him for those amount of years. And those of you who don't know, Mordechai lost his wife. It was already 10 years ago. And his wife was my wife's Madrichan B'nai Akiva. When I say her brother was in my class in high school, when I say that we go back, so the last morning at the end of davening, he walked in, and then he sat down and comforted us. He started to cry, and he turned to my father and he said, "I also lost my wife." And he read the various things that needed to be read to ask us to get up with so much conviction and with so much emotions. I wasn't expecting that day. I expected just, okay, we're getting up, and then he walked with us. He walked with us outside. So just in case you knew someplace that there was a tzaddik in Yerushalayim, so God sent various shlichim to come, and maybe to put it a little differently, God, so at least thematically it would be more related to the parsha. There's not really separate seating, by the way. That just kind of happened, okay? It just looks that way. And I think that the message is that God sends various milachim, which will take us right into this week's parsha. And sometimes the milachim look like anashim, but nonetheless they are indeed milachim. And so, as I said, I'm very, very thankful. If myself and my brothers and my sister were able to, for whatever reasons, attract all kinds of people who came. So, as I said, ultimately, all of that is in the honor of my mother, and to me, that's very, very clear. And when I started this thinking, then, as I said, then I had to play catch up, which didn't begin until some point later on Monday, when I then, normally on Sunday mornings, on Sunday morning. And then, again, I get a further thought about what I'm going to be thinking about. And part of the problem with Shiva is that you're not allowed to learn Torah, and therefore I had to consciously keep all thoughts of Torah out of my mind, which was part of the difficulty. And from the time of the Aninut, and just conversely, that till my mother passed away, and we had a number of times we were told, hurry to the hospital, this is it. And the first number of times that happened, it wasn't it. But every single time that happened, as I said, the opposite, the flip side of that is I refused to think about what I would say by a eulogy. I refused to think about what would happen afterwards. And it was really, my main thoughts at that point were, what are the laws of Aninut and what are the laws of Avilut, and when do I start and what do I need to do and what can I do and so on. But I refused to think, and when I actually spoke by the Levaya, if anybody was there, then they would know that everyone else who spoke had everything written out, and I didn't. I just, I knew what I wanted to say, but I had no idea if I said it, which means I've given many, many talks in my life, but I've never spoken for my mother while she was not alive and within a couple of feet from me, and that seemed to be something which was far more difficult to do. And I knew I said more or less what I wanted to say, but I had no idea if it came out in a coherent way. And then someone actually had videoed it and sent it to me, and it turns out, and I was shocked that I made any sense whatsoever. So therefore, this process of keeping your mind in certain places was a part of this. One of my teachers, and not so many of my teachers are alive, but one of my teachers who I learned with both in yeshiva and afterwards when I was learning Semacha of David Miller. So when he came, and I told him that the hardest parts of Shiva are being unable to learn Torah or think about it, and to be unable to stand up for you when you came in. So then he said to everyone who could hear, I hope that you have nachat from your students the same way that I do from mine, which was, of course, very, very generous of him. So I already gave enough hints about the angels and so on. And the place that I wanted to start, and the first thought that I had, was ironically a source that then never made it into your sources. As I said, I kind of suspect I'm not necessarily thinking clearly. My wife at some point said, I realize nothing I'm saying to you is being processed. It's not that. I generally have a good memory, But I realize that memory only works when you hear it. When you don't hear things, then you can't remember what you never heard. And part of memory is actually actively listening and then processing and knowing. So my first thought was actually to talk about a midrash. And the midrash essentially makes a connection between a pasuk in Tehillim, which we all know, and with Sarah Imenu, and it applies to her the pasuk Eim Habanim Semacha. So as I said, that was the first thing that came to my mind, and that's what I decided that I wanted to talk about. So I'll come back, B'li neder, I'll come back to that midrash. But let's first start learning, and we're going to notice some things in the text so that I can try to convince you that I really did prepare. So let's start from the beginning of the parsha. Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei mamre, v'hu yoshev petach ha'ol kachol hayom. There is enough material in that pasuk by itself for us to spend the entire shir right on that, and I'm sure we've done that before, but we're not going to do that now. We have some type of a revelation or an epiphany, or maybe even, as some say, that revelation is the next pasuk when he lifts up his eyes and sees the three people. That's the content of the revelation, because no content is shared. Vayisa einav vayar, and he lifts up his eyes and he sees. V'nei shlosha anashim nitzavim alav. And throughout this chapter, they're always referred to as anashim. Three people come, and our tradition is, especially because of the next chapter, that these people are actually angelic, but what's presented over here in the text, and maybe what's presented to Avram, is that they're people. Maybe the takeaway of that is that Avram treats all people as if they're angels, and maybe Lot needs to see angels to treat them as people. But nonetheless, by Lot, it does say that he sees Melachim coming. Vayar, and he sees Vayaratz, and then right there, Avram, that's Avram. Avram goes running, especially when we connect it to the previous parsha that Avram is recovering from the Brit Milah, which, again, Rashi brings this, and Midrashim bring this as the background of the text, which is very important, because what it's telling you is don't read this chapter, don't read Perek Yud Chet without having Perek Yud Zayin absolutely in your mind, and therefore it's a continuation of it. And even the very beginning, Vayar Elav Hashem, who's they love? So you have to end the previous parsha, which means it's practically begging you, realize we're just continuing for where we're up to. Vayera Elav. Who's the Elav? Meaning the problem is, how do you know it's Avram? Because that's who we were talking about a moment ago. So I'm saying this idea that there is this continuation from the previous chapter, I don't think you can escape it. It's not just that, excuse me? It's not just that midrashically, Avram just now recovered from the Brit Milah. No, it's Vayera Elav Hashem. Right? It doesn't say who. Who are we talking about? So that's the continuation from the previous parak. So I'm saying, I think that's quite clear. Again, just let me belabor this point, repeat it, and make sure we get it. There's some things in our mind that get registered as saying, that was Rashi, but it's not in the text. Or that's a midrash, but it's not in the text. And then you have to go back and say, is it really not in the text? Maybe it is in the text. I'm going to show you a couple of other things like that today, which are actually in the text, but we don't know they're in the text because we don't pay attention. Good. He sees these people, he goes running, he bows down, and according to many Rishonim, all of this takes place in a vision, not just the Rambam. The Ramban, when he texts the Rambam, kind of makes believe it's only the Rambam. Many of the Balei Tosfot go in the same direction. V'yomar, and then there's a question, the next word, Aleph, Dalef, Nun, Yud, who is he talking to? Is he talking to God? Is this Kodesh? Is it Chol? Vayomer, I'll read it and you can decide what it was. Kodesh Chol, Vayomer, Adonai, Imna matzati chen beinecha, al na tavor mi alavdecha. So is he talking to God? Is he talking to these people? Is he talking to angels? Yukachnam at mayim v'rchzu raglechem v'shanu tachat ha'etz v'cha pat lechem, and so on. And let's skip to Pasuk Vav. What I want you to pay attention to the next couple of verses is the element of speed. Vayimaher Avraham ha'ohela el Sarah. Do you know what's great about that Pasuk? It's the first time she's referred to by her new name. Avraham is here referred to by the new name. So again, if we think of the continuation from the last chapter to this chapter, so now it's Avraham and now it's Sarah. But there's something else which is hanging above us, which creates the tension or creates the anticipation. And that was the content of the previous chapter. And there were two elements to it. One element to it was that the Brit Milah was then commanded. And the other element is that there was a promise. And that promise is that Avraham and Sarah would have a child. Avram and Sarai never had any children, but Avram and Sarah are going to have children. Avraham becomes Avraham at this point because, of course, you get a new name when you have the Brit Milah, which means that there is some kind of element of a transformation which is taking place. And the transformation which is taking place has to do with his body itself. It's not just his name and it's not just his attitude. If you want to call this a conversion, I'm okay with this. If you even want to say that a conversion, a ger, is like a katan hanolad dami, it's like a new child who's born, it's like a rebirth has taken place, I'm fine going in that direction. And then I'll say it again, Avram is a different person, and now we're meeting this Avraham and this Sarah, but don't miss that point. But there was a promise, and that promise has, at least until this point, not come to fruition. I mean, the other thing that you could think about, and now I'm getting only slightly facetious, but don't think overly facetious, because it's actually more important than you think. I mean, what do you serve by a bris? So generally people serve bagels. That's what it is. Bagels, of course, are round. That's also important. But presumably, and I'm going to come back to this, we have to come back to this. Presumably that what we're talking about now is Pesach, and on Pesach you have matzot. By the way, matzot are also round. How we know that, we'll see in a moment. And therefore they should be serving matzah. I mean, my mother did make matzah bagels. I mean, a kind of, which was good with jam, lots and lots of jam. So right now we have this great anticipation. And I'm just going to note, I want to read the next pasuk and then we'll make more of the observation. The first part, Vayameher Avraham, just pause right there. Avram rushes. So Avram doing things quickly does not surprise us. Avram has rizut shel Avram, right? Avram, right, getting up early, Vayashkem Avram b'boker, Avram moving quickly, doing things quickly. And the fact that he may be a very old man at this point, and the fact that he just had a Brit Milah, maybe makes this more impressive and maybe even more surprising. But this is Avraham. Vayimeher Avram olah el Sarah, vayomer mahari. So stop right there. So Avram is pulling Sarah into his world. And now you just have to think for a second why that may be happening. So if we go back a little bit, and maybe we'll see some of this as we continue, Avram's been promised from almost the very beginning that he's going to have descendants, numerous descendants. He's going to have all kinds of descendants. His descendants are going to inherit the land. And it was only in the last revelation, Perek Yud Zayin, that God ever let on that the children that you will have, Avraham, will be through Sarah. And, especially if you think about Avram and Sarah as people who've, been together. Avram megayeret anashim, Sarah megayeret et anashim, and the two of them are a team, and the two of them work together, and the two of them are respectful and dedicated, and so on. And maybe even Sarah is on a higher level of prophecy, which Chazal say, right? Listen to what Sarah says. It's interesting that on some level, and I'm saying this with only the slightest of respectful hesitation, maybe part of what Avraham is doing right now is he wants Sarah to be deserving as well of this bracha, which is about to hopefully take place. Of course, there's another problem, which we'll get to in a moment, but we can get ahead of ourselves. Why exactly do we need these people to come at this point? Why do we need this message? Don't answer my question yet. Vayome mahari, shlosh sa'im kemach solot lushi, va'asi ugot. So the word ugot over here actually is connected to matzah. That's part of what Midrash and Chazal do by saying that it was Pesach and making matzot, and ugot would be something which is round. And that's the reason why matzot are round. Any of you who will tell me, but your matzot aren't round, your matzot are square, that was one of the things that was done. If anybody wants to look online, I have actually a very interesting share about the issue of machine matzot, which, by the way, became one of the first Hasidic mitnagdik divisions by whether you can use a machine or not use a machine matzot. And by the way, the whole argument there was not about the machines in the baking; it was the machines about the lisha and so on, the kneading of it. That's what the machines weren't doing the rest of it in those days. It was only more recently that machines got more sophisticated, but one of the resolutions that people should never get confused between machine matzot and real matzot was the real matzot would retain the round shape, while the machine matzot then would have square shape, so everyone would know, or anyone in the know would know that they're not real matzot. My family custom, which means me and my father and perhaps some others, is that we prefer the machines because we trust machines more than we trust people, especially yeshiva bachrim who moonlight as matzah makers. One of my Rabbeim, Rav Gusman, Rabbi Yisrael Zev Gusman, who was a dayan in Vilna, when he came to Eretz Yisrael and he wanted to get some handmade matzot, was shocked to see that all the handmade matzot are being made by yeshiva bachrim. So he went and inquired and asked, are there any places that the women are making the matzot, the ones who actually know how to handle dough and know how to make sure it's not going to come to chametz? So he was makbid to use hand matzot, but only those made by women. So I'll just say if you've never heard of that chumrah, right? There's always other chumrah for Pesach, but the chumrah where you're trying to avoid chametz is one. What happened is that my father also would get hand matzot until the time that we got hand matzot. There were chametz. They were just chametz. It was they weren't baked properly. They were connected by strings and so on. And from that day on, my father would not let the hand matzot in the house. And as I said, we're makbid on machines who don't make those kinds of mistakes. So anyway, matzot are around. I'm waiting for somebody. Again, we'll throw down the gauntlet. I'm waiting for somebody, some machine matzah maker who'll say, I'm going to make round. Right? There's no reason not to, other than get all kinds of people upset with you. By the way, if I'll go back, there was a time that a very famous, very significant rabbi, no names, asked me to join him by baking machine matzot. So we went, and a bunch of rabbis are making matzot, and we made them, and we all took home the matzot from a very nice, prominent factory. And he called me 2 days later, I hope the ladies love this, and said, we forgot to take challah. So I'll say it again. Anyway, I don't believe my wife has ever forgotten to take challah. I think that's why she bakes challah almost b'li neder every single Friday, because she wants to take challah, and then she davens for everyone in the world who needs to be davened for. And she never forgets to take challah. That's all that I'll say. She never forgets to take challah. And here you have a bunch of rabbis who are learned and know all these laws about baking matzah, and we kind of forgot. So then, by the way, the halacha is then you take challah from the made matzot. You have to put them all together on the same thing, and then take the challah from the finished product. So let's get back to our Avraham thinking that he's got to get Sarah to do mitzvot. I hope you enjoy that. Avraham thinking and trying to bring her into this world of mitzvot so that she'll be deserving. You realize this is all my imaginary, so far, first subtext. We'll get to some other subtexts going on. But the I'm just saying, notice the word. Vayimaher Avraham, and he says to her, Mahari. Right, come, be from like me, like do things quickly as well. And again, I think to be deserving of this, and by the way, why am I going there? Because Avram did something which was transformative in order to be transformed. And what was that? He had a Brit Milah. So now what's going to transform Sarah to become from Sarai to Sarah, other than God saying, okay, you got a new name? So what else happens over here? So yes, when a man converts, when a woman converts, so a man accepts himself, go to mitzvah, has a brit milah, and a woman goes to the mikvah and accepts the mitzvot. So, okay, so that's all that there is. But I understand this issue of waiting or somehow creating the transformation. Continue. Pasuk Zayin. Ve'ela bakar ratz Avraham. Again, Avraham in his chesed doing mode. Ve'ikach ben bakar v'rach v'tov yitain el hana'ar v'yimaher lasototo. So again, he also did something else interesting here. He just got the nar involved. So who's the nar? Who's the nar? So again, we work with our theory of conservation of Ne'arim. So who's the nar? The nar presumably is Yishmael. And Yishmael, by the way, one chapter ago, also underwent a transformation. What was the transformation? He went from the Ben Avraham to a not Ben Avraham. But of course he's a Ben Avraham. But no, he's not. And how do I know that he's not? There's another pasuk in this week's parsha that tells me that he's not. And what's that? And that's what Avram's worried about. And the second this happens, Avram starts to pray. And Avram's prayer is that, Yishmael should live. He's supposed to have a son. Yishmael should live. I'll tell you something else. And again, we're going to have to understand all of this. Avram is going to try to keep Yishmael in the fold. And that's not so simple. First of all, what pasuk was I referring to when saying that Yishmael is not counted? Okay, that Yitzchak, your son, your only son. So who seems to think that he's not counted as Avram's son? God. And why is he not Avram's son? Because Avram's son has to be Sarah's son as well. Why? Because Avram and Sarah are together, and Avram and Sarah are a team. And if it's not Avram and Sarah, then it's not Zelozeh. I don't know how to translate that. Zelozeh. It's something else, and that's really what God is saying. And that's part of the tension that's been building up from the moment we met Avraham all the way till this point. And then, of course, it has to be Sarah. But what Avraham, if I'm not mistaken, is doing is, Rashi actually says it, so don't lose your place. And those who, hope some of you found the sources wherever it is that I put them. In source number 3, in Pasuk Zayin, now you'll realize it's not just my imagination. El hana'ar, ze Yishmael lechancho b'mitzvot. That Avraham wants to educate Yishmael in mitzvot because he wants to keep him within the fold. He wants to keep him over here, which means there's a tension, and the tension is that Hagar is rejected, Yishmael is rejected. It's Sarah, it's Yitzchak. That's the future, and Avraham wants to make Sarah deserving, but he also wants to make Yishmael deserving because Avram wants to hold on to Yishmael. He doesn't want to lose him. Of course, if you can now say to me, so is this really appropriate for perhaps the Rasha and the Tzaddik to live together? I hope you all realize that later on in our Parsha, in this week's Parsha, in Perek Yudchet, we're going to have the exact same issue being spelled out clearly, where Avram's going to be told that Sodom is going to be destroyed, and Avram's response is going to be, well, perhaps there's some righteousness over there. By the way, just stop right there. Avram obviously knew nothing about yeshiva education, right? Because if you have some righteous and some wicked, so what do? You kick out the wicked. So all the righteous can flourish. You don't want to keep the righteous there within. For Avram to say to God, maybe there's some righteous people there, so let's save the whole city, it should be quite the opposite. Righteous people there will save the righteous and get rid of all the wicked. Over here as well, in Avram's tent, let's get rid of Yishmael and let's just raise Yitzchak, which is ultimately what God wants. But it's something which Avram's sensibility doesn't allow. Because Avram's whole world is about transforming wicked into righteous. If Avram would have said right now, let's only look at the world in a static way. Who's good, who's bad, it's binary. All the bad, let's blow them away. And essentially, if we were to say that Avraham would adapt a Noach perspective, I'm sorry for picking on Noach, a little sorry for picking on Noach, all the wicked are going to perish and all the righteous are going to survive. Great. Let's have a flood and blow them all away. And who complains about that? Avram complains about that. And Avram says, what are you talking about? Maybe there's some good over here. But even if there's not good, Avram seems to really believe, passionately believe, that we can turn something negative into positive. Now, you don't know where I'm going today yet. You have no idea where I'm going. I know where I'm going. So that's good. I'm totally unconvinced. I know where I'm going today, but I'll tell you the hint. What was the hint to all of this? It was obvious. It's the matzot. Okay. And if it is the matzot, you maybe now for the first time understand where in the world the Erev Rav came from and why Moshe allowed all kinds of Erev Rav to leave with them. Because again, it should be, let's destroy the wicked, let's save the righteous, and it's static. It's where it is right now. But of course, there's another issue that the Jews may not have been all that righteous at that point. Elu of the Avodah Zarah, Elu of the Avodah Zarah. So maybe it's not so simple, but we believe in some. But Moshe believes that we can take out some of the others, the Erev Rav, and they cause us a really big headache. By the way, so does Yishmael. But that doesn't stop Avram by trying to be mechanech oto b'mitzvot. And that's what's really interesting about Avraham, because Avraham seems to look at things a little bit differently than we look at things. Because as I've said many times, if any of us would have been told that I'm going to wipe out the wicked, you can pick the location now. If it's the Houthim, if it's Hezbollah, if it's Hamas, if it's New York City at this point, that any of the wicked that I'm going to wipe out completely, would we have the ability to pray like Avram and say, well, hold it, slow down. Maybe there's some righteous people. You all know that every rabbi, except for the rabbis, for Linda Goldstein, who's the, right? Okay, if you know she isn't great. Then, she doesn't exist, by the way. Okay. The rabbi of Aza, who keeps bothering people on Twitter. But everyone would say, yeah, wipe out the wicked. We would all sign up to it in a second. Go ahead, and then maybe have this uncomfortable place that's not Avraham. Avram believes in a world which is dynamic. Avram believes in a world which is redeemable. That's really the issue. It's redeemable, because if it's not redeemable, then like what in the world is he doing? One man with maybe one woman against an entire culture. If you don't believe it's redeemable, then what are you doing? So let's continue. What we're told then, if we go back to the first source, back to Perek Yudchet, a couple things get interesting then. Some of the food is brought over to the men. Vayomru pasuk tere lav, ayeh Sarah ishtecha. Where's Sarah? By the way, by calling her Sarah, what is this acknowledging? The new name, the new identity. The woman who would have children. You only can call her Sarah as if you are privy to the inside information about the prophecy from the previous chapter. Are you with me on that point? That's how this works. So are these men or are these angels? Are these people that have information? Absolutely. Vayomer hine ba'ohel. She's inside the tent. Vayomer, and they say, Shuv ashuv elecha ka'et chaya v'nei ben l'Sara ishtecha. Right? Will you come back and Sarah will have a son? V'Sara shamat petach ha'oel v'hu acharav. V'Avram v'Sara zekenim ba'im b'yamim chadal liot l'Sara orach kinashim. And both Avram and Sarah are old, and Sarah, what it says here, was postmenopausal. V'tetzchak Sarah b'kirba le'mar charei baloti hatali adna v'ni zaken. She goes, it's a little too late. This is not happening at this particular point in time, and my husband's elderly as well. So I just want to pause there for a second. None of this should be a surprise. As we say when we learn Gemara, you can pull out a thumb, a manavshach. If they know her name is Sarah, then they were privy to the information of the previous chapter. If they know the information of the previous chapter, then they know that Sarah is going to have a child. So if they know Sarah is going to have a child, then if her name is Sarah now, can you imagine Avram calling her Sarai all these years? She's a nice name, sounds like an endearing name. And then he says, oh, listen, today your name is Sarah. Who said my name is Sarah? Well, God said it's Sarah. Why did he say it's Sarah? Because we've undergone a transformation. What's the transformation? You're going to have a child. How in the world does Avram know about Perek Yud Zayin, changes her name, but she doesn't know? Why is it necessary to send these people at this point? It's already known information from the previous chapter. And there's a bigger problem. We'll get to the bigger problem. In another verse or so, it says, Sarah laughs about this. And then you have, did she laugh? She didn't laugh. She didn't laugh. She denied laughing, and so on. But we have another really important word, pasuk Yudalid. Hipalei me Hashem davar l'moed. Who's speaking, by the way? Vayomar Shem el Avraham. Previous verse. Lama zetzara lemor ha'af umnam eled vanizakanti. Hipalei me Hashem davar l'moed ashuv elecha ka'it chaya l'sara ben. I will return. Who's the I over here? Should I ask that again? It actually sounds that God is speaking. In Pasuk Yud Gimel, God is speaking. If Pasuk Yud Gimel, God is speaking, it sure sounds like Pasuk Yud Dalet, God is still speaking. Which actually means that God is saying, God can't do this? L'moed. Now what does l'moed mean? L'moed mean... So I hope that you know this. According to Chazal, it's Pesach now. How do I know it's Pesach now? Because they're serving ugot. By the way, there is matzah in this week's parsha. Who serves the matzah? Lot serves the matzah in the next chapter. Why does Lot serve the matzah? Because Avram eats matzah on Pesach. By the way, why would Avram eat matzah on Pesach? And that takes us back to the Brit Bein Abtarim. God says 400 years, right? Your descendants, from the day you have descendants. 400 years, they're going to leave. Yitzchak's birth is when the clock starts. Yitzchak is born on Pesach, because it's 400 years, to the day, to the moment. So therefore, Avraham knows that it's going to be Yetziat Mitzrayim from the Brit Bein Abtarim, which means every single year from that point on, I could argue that Avram celebrates Pesach. Why? I know. V'chol dor v'dor chayiv adam l'rot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatza Mitzrayim. In every single, right, b'chol dor v'dor, because most of us, in order for us to see ourselves as if we left Egypt, what do we need to do? We need to thrust ourselves back into the recesses of our collective memory and remember that day that we left Egypt. And what does Avram have to do? He has to anticipate the future of the day that his descendants will leave Egypt. Avram celebrates Pesach before Pesach happens because Avram knows it's going to happen. Avram believes in it. Avram has faith. Avram, v'yamin lo Hashem, right? God, he believes. He has complete emunah. Avram celebrates Pesach. That's what Chazal are telling us. He's sitting there, and they're serving ugot, and even better, Lot was raised in Avram's tent, and is serving ugot. And by the way, that whole chapter about Lot leaving Sdom is all about leaving Egypt. I talked about this years ago. I wrote about this years ago. I have this in an essay on this in my second book, written years ago. So let's continue. So now at the very end of this chapter, when he's told that Sdom is going to be destroyed, I hope you realize there's a parallel. In Perek Yud Zayin, we have Avram being told he's going to have a child, and then he's going to pray for the other one, for the have-not. Over here, he's being told, again, have a child, Sarah's going to have a child, and then he's told about the wickedness, and again, he's told to be destroyed. But there's a deeper subtext to this, and that is that Sdom is comparable to Egypt. Where did we see that? Am I making this up, or we've seen this? Now you're going to make me go look for the pasuk? Source 15. V'yisa lo tetena vayaret kol kikar hayarden ki kula mashke lefnei shachet Hashem et Sdom et Amorah ki gan Hashem ke'eretz Mitzrayim. Lot, when he first gazes upon this place, I had some real interesting things to say about this last week that I didn't get to say. Maybe some of you read it, but I had some interesting things in the shir that I never gave. By the way, I finished writing in case you're worried. I knew my mother was in a very precarious situation, so from Sunday morning through Monday morning, I wrote 22 pages then, and the second I finished it, when I got the phone call to hurry up to the hospital, and I did not make it back to the hospital. So I'd finished it right before she passed away. So at the end, I wrote that it was in her memory. So in case people were worried, how did you write that during this week? So I wrote it quickly right beforehand, and I didn't read it over. So I don't know if it needed some fixes. So here we see that Egypt is in the background of all of this, but of course Egypt has been in the background the whole time. Do you know where else Egypt is in the background? Regarding Yishmael, because who's Yishmael? Look at, where should we start with this? In source 17, V'sarai ishlam lo yodala v'shivcha mitzrit b'shma Hagar. But sorry, even better. Source 16 first. Sorry. V'sarai ishlam lo yodala v'shivchat mitzrit b'shma Hagar. Source 17 is the Targum Yonatan shivcha mitzrit v'shma Hagar bat paro. Which again, you know that it's even better. I'm not going to explain all of that now, but what I will say in the Maseh Avot Sim Lebanim, when the Jews actually do leave Egypt, then the bat paro comes with them. So therefore, the Maseh Avot, they stick the bat paro in as well. Anybody follow me on that? It was very good what I just now said. So should I say it again, or you didn't follow? You did follow? Again. The again is that when they do leave Egypt, Bat Paro is part of the story. And she does leave Egypt. Bitya, who's the daughter of Paro, in Divrei Hayamim, we're told that she leaves. She marries one of the Jews and she leaves Egypt. So that is the Banim. So if that's in the Banim, you need a siman for this in the beginning. So there you have Hagar Bat Paro being part of the original story when Avram and Sarah leave Egypt and they get the Makot and so on and so forth. So if it's in the Siman Lebanim, you need there as well in the Maaseh Avot. Where else do you see Egypt within the whole story of Ishmael other than his mother and his grandfather? In source 18, V'yisabin bar Paran v'tikach lo imo isha ve'eretz Mitzrayim. And he marries somebody from Egypt. So I'm going to say it again. When I told you that there's a subtext to all of this, what the subtext is, it's this Avram and Sarah story, but from the very beginning, there's been this Egypt aspect to it. Again, I'm not clear enough today. Immediately they get to Israel and they go down to Egypt. And Paro tries to grab Sarah. And then what ends up happening? He gets Makot, right? He gets Makot. And then Avram leaves Baruch Gadol, which means right there, the Ramban points this out. It's based on the Midrash. Right there you have the Egypt story. So I'm just saying, just add one more element. What element is also Bat Paro being a part of the story and leaving. But now you realize that the tension over here is setting the stage for the future, what's going to happen. So anybody who is joining the Egyptian side is on the wrong side of history. For Lot to leave Egypt with Avram and then say, but I want to go back to a place which kind of reminds us of Egypt, is a problem. And therefore you have this clarity taking place of Lot being on the wrong side of history. Good, very good. So now we'll do one or two other midrashim, but just first what bothers me, and I already told you, in source number 2 is the previous chapter, that's Perek Yud Zayin, where Avram's name is changed and Sarah's name is changed, and they're told they're going to have children. Why do we need the same thing told twice? That is part of what is problematic. But I will note, and now I'm repeating myself, that in the first one, in Perek Yud Zayin, Avram undergoes this transformation, and what I'm waiting then for is the transformation of Sarah. In source number 3, Rashi here tells us 3 men come, and you all know this Rashi because they like to teach this as kids, and it says, Echad, the 3 angels, as far as Rashi is concerned. Echad levaseret Sarah, one to give the message. Echad lafoch et sdom. Echad lerpot et Avraham, and one to heal Avraham. And it's at this point I want to ask you a question. Why does only Avraham need to be healed? Oh, because he had a Brit Milah. Maybe Sarah needs to be healed as well. You know why? Because she's postmenopausal. She needs, what kind of therapy? What did we say? She needs some estrogen. She needs what? Hormonal therapy. But she actually has a bigger problem. And what's the bigger problem? The bigger problem is if we go back when we first met them, and I told you that's really where the story begins in source number 4. V'yikach Avram v'Nachor lahem nashim shem eshet Avram Sarai v'shem eshet Nachor Milka bat Haran avi Milka v'avi Yiska v'ti Sarai akara en lavlad, and Sarai is barren. She cannot have children. The problem over here is not, do you want me to use the word just or not use the word just? It's the problem over here. The medical problem is not that she's postmenopausal. The problem over here is she can't have children. On the other hand, both Avram and Sarah, when they process, you want to go back now and look at Perek Yud Chet? So you know that. Sarah says, after I'm old and after he's old, and go back and look at Avram's response in Perek Yud Zayin. Pasuk Yud Zayin, Yud Zayin, Yud Zayin, v'yipol Avram apanav Yitzchak, v'yom bilibo, ala ben 100 shanim yivaled, v'im Sarah habat tishim shana teled. Is this 90-year-old woman going to have children? So I want to ask you a question. Do they actually know that Sarah can't have children? No, again, there is a certain type, and any person who's ever suffered through any type of infertility will understand the tragedy of infertility and understand the sadness and the depression and month after month after month of trying to have a child and then finding out that it's just not working. And presumably they've gone through this, and you can hear it in Avraham's prayers where he sometimes turns to God, right? You know it, and he says, I only have Eliezer, who's going to inherit me. And it's almost like he can't even ask. But you know that's part of this world that Avram lives in. In source number 5, the Gemara takes source number 4 very, very far. And it says, we'll start on Rav Nachman and Rav Avua, Sarah Imenu Ailanitaita. That means that she never developed the secondary sexual development. And by the way, that's going very far as well. But Yisar Akara in Lavlad saying, no, she could not physically have children. Afilu Beit Vlad Ein La. So the Gemara again is going a little crazy and saying she didn't have a womb. Physically, there's a woman who could not have children. But I want to ask you a question. Does Avram and Sarah know that Sarah can't have children? Do they know that it's impossible? And it sounds like, I hope you're all going to understand what I'm saying now, it sounds like they don't know. It sounds like they never knew. Why? Because they both focus on the age, and they don't focus on, which means essentially all those years there was expectation and maybe anticipation and then disappointment and perhaps depression. And then nonetheless you see Avram is such a giving person, and what we see over here is greatness, and Sarah seems to feel very bad that Avram can't have his child. And I'm saying all this as a background, but it's right now, perhaps for the first time, that we realize they don't know. So I just want to mention something which this made me think of. And by the way, not all the commentaries work on this. If you look at source number 6 and 7, the Radak does in both places. Here in Perek Yud Aleph and again in Perek Yud Zayin, he notes, Siper ki Sarai haita akara v'leoda rak yedei nes she'asa hakel im Avram nes betoch nes ki haita akara v'yoda v'od she'haita bat 60 ki yoda. That God performed 2 miracles. One is she can't have children, and 2 is she can't have children. And nonetheless, God did a double miracle over here, and that itself got me thinking as well. So what is the significance of this double miracle? So now let's try again, because again, the whole story has just now become a little bit more complicated. And my first thought would have even been maybe you need the 2 different times they were told the information for the double miracle, but it doesn't work. Because in both places, they both focus on the same thing. Meaning, had Avraham said, but what are you talking about? Sarah can't have children, but he doesn't say that. Both Avram and Sarah, both of what they're thinking about is, but she's too old, which seems to be they don't know about the other aspect. In source number 9, there is a Mishnah, a Gemara. The Mishnah said, "Vatzorik l'sha'avar," and on that the Gemara continues and says there's certain things which is called a tefillat shav. What's a tefillat shav? It's an impossible prayer. The Gemara over here says, for example, a woman's pregnant, and you say, "Yehi ratzon shetiled ishti zachar." May it be God's will that my wife have a male child. The Gemara says, "Harezu tefillat shav." That is an inappropriate prayer. Not because you want a male over a female or a female over a male. It's an inappropriate child because it's an impossible prayer. She is either pregnant with a male or a female, and that's not going to change. You can't pray for the impossible. You come along the way and you hear a scream come out of the city. Right? Let it be God's will that was not in my house. You can't pray for the past. Either it was or it wasn't. You can't pray for something impossible. Nonetheless, I want to point out a remarkable comment in source number 10 in the Shita Mukubetzet in Ketuvot. Now I'm just showing off my Bekiyut here because you can't get to this by itself. The Gemara here talks about the day that Yehuda Nasi died. The Gemara says that they made a proclamation. All the people are praying downstairs. And they said, whoever says that Yehuda Nasi is dead will be stabbed with a sword. So it's a little bizarre thing to say. Either he's dead or he's not dead. So the Gemara says, Yidaker b'cherev, de'ilu haviyade b'beirur demit, lo haviboy rachme aleh. Dilachaye tchiyat ametim lo havaboy lemiboy rachme, v'hachi amr defilu meit, v'inu lo yodana de lo haviboy rachme aleh, b'cheschet shulchay ki hechet dilachaye b'tfilatam. I shall translate. The Gemara is saying is as follows. The Shita Mikdash is saying as follows. We can't pray for something impossible. Do you know when you can't pray for something impossible? When you don't know it's impossible. But the lack of knowledge that it's impossible allows us to pray. Which means if you don't know that Rabbi Yehuda's Nasi is dead, then you could pray for him to live. You could pray for him to get better. Because then God is not doing a miracle of Tchiyat HaMeitim in your mind. You thought he was just sick and he got better. So the prayer for the impossible you can't do, but when you don't know it's impossible, you can do it. Which means, can we come back over here? If Avram knows that Sarah doesn't even have a womb, you can't pray. It's impossible. But when Avram just thinks that it's okay, it just didn't work this month, then you can pray, and you can pray, and you can pray. And Avram and Sarah prayed because they weren't praying for the impossible as far as they knew. And God did a nes b'toch nes, and God allowed her to have a child. Now, Chazal say in the same midrash that I have that I didn't bring it for you today, the Ema Benim Semacha. This is found in, if anybody wants me to send it to them afterwards, I'll be happy to do it. It's in Bereishit Rabbah, Siman Nun Gimel, Siman Hey. In that midrash it says, and you know this, and it's in other places as well, that Sarah reverts to becoming a young woman. She became young again. Now, what's the textual proof that she became young again? The proof in the Torah, that Avimelech tried to kidnap her. It's a little harder for me to say that Avimelech was hitting on an 89-year-old woman. No offense to anybody here who's 89. But if she becomes young again, and she becomes attractive again, kind of makes a little bit more sense. Sarah looks young again, which means that what's happening in this place right over here, Sarah is undergoing a transformation the same way that Avram underwent a transformation. Avram has his Brit Milah, becomes a ger, becomes kekatana nolad dami, he becomes as if spiritually he is a new person. Sarah also undergoes a transformation. And it's much deeper than we realize, than the protagonists realize, because essentially what happened is impossible. But you realize now that nothing is impossible for God. And it's now that I want to go back to why all this is important in terms of leaving Egypt. Because the whole Avram and Sarah relationship becomes the prototype specifically for Yetziat Mitzrayim. And now go back and think a second. I asked you before why it is that the angel, Raphael, if you will, heals Avraham, but doesn't heal Sarah. Sarah needs a refuah. Sarah needs a refuah because she can't have children. Again, that's not my going as far as the Gemara saying she's an islandit or saying that she doesn't have a Beit Rechem or so on. That's the Torah saying she's barren. She can't have children. There is a problem. She can't have children. So that can't have children is not something which the Malach does. Raphael doesn't heal that. That's specifically God does that. Lo yadei malach. No, did I just now say something? Lo yadei malach, v'lo yadei saraf, v'lo yadei shaliach, ela kadosh baruch hu b'chvodo v'atzmo, transforms Sarah. The leaving of Egypt is a birth of the Jewish people. Mitzrayim is a makom tsar. It's a womb. The Jewish people emerge and they're reborn. They become something which is completely new. The same way that Avram Avinu changes from Avram to Avraham and Sarai to Sarah. There is a rebirth over here. That's part of what's taking place. And what's interesting again now, I go back to the Ishmael as the Erev Rav. Will the Erev Rav live or not? Will we pray for stone? And Moshe says, no, let's take out some of the Erev Rav. And is Moshe right or is Moshe wrong? Moshe's being like Avraham, and there's hope. If there can be transformation, if there can be a rebirth, then maybe the whole world is redeemable. And it's true that the whole world is redeemable, but maybe we still have to wait a little bit to get there. Which means leaving Egypt, which is an essential part of Jewish history, is the impossible takes place. And it's praying for something which we can't even understand. And it doesn't mean that we're not in a precarious situation immediately afterwards when we leave Egypt and there's this rebirth, and the next thing you know, we're standing in front of the water with the Egyptians chasing after us, which is just like the continuation of this week's Parsha, that right afterwards the son is born and now finds himself in a precarious situation with a sword coming down towards his neck. And maybe there's a scratch and maybe there's a wound, but don't touch that boy, he's going to come down from the altar. And this is Jewish history. Jewish history combines miracles that we don't even understand. We're here today because we survived and we were reborn and there were knives coming at us and we got off of the altar, and because we crossed through the sea in an impossible type of way, which means the story of Avram and Sarah is the story of leaving Egypt, which is the story of Jewish history. So I just want to end. We have 2 minutes left. Because I told you, didn't know where I was going. I knew where I was going. It's all there staring at us. God does miracles that we don't even see sometimes. So let me just end by going back and talking for a moment about my mother. So I don't remember who I told how much to, but both of my mother's parents were born in Europe. I know Europe's a very big place. And the truth is that both of them leaving and getting out happened to have some levels of the unexpected to it. My grandfather, who's, by the way, his father, his name was Dov David, and my middle name David comes from him, and my grandmother's name was Ari Mordechai, my first name comes from him. So my grandfather first, right after World War I, my great-grandfather said, if there was one world war, there'll be another one. And to try to get him out for being drafted, took him to America. But they didn't take him into America because they didn't want too many Jews at that point. And the boat turned around and went back to Europe. And it stopped in Cuba. And my grandfather then spent 3 years in Cuba before he was able to get back to America. So again, just the luck of being able, the miracle within the miracle. And by the way, that concept of a miracle, the miracle, I actually gave you some sources about that, because it's all over leaving Egypt as well. The barad was a miracle, nes mitoch nes, the same term is used there. The ish, right? The fire and the water together, the ice and the fire together, there's a miracle within a miracle. That's part of what leaving Egypt is. That's part of the miracle of Sarah having a child. That's why it was so important to be that way. My grandfather leaving Europe, but then being sent back to Europe. I noticed a number of years ago, I found the manifest for the boat of my mother's mother when they left Europe. And I noticed something, that the entire family was together, and then my grandmother was not together with the rest of them. And I asked my mother, I said, why is this? And she was shocked that I found the manifest, and she was shocked that's the way it was written. And she says, I'll tell you what happened. There was a doctor that was checking each person before they got on the boat. My grandmother's eyes were very bad. They didn't want to let her on the boat. And they turned her around and told her to get off the boat. And then only later she was able to get back on, and somehow she passed the test, whatever it was, the second time, and they didn't realize how poor her eyesight or whatever it was. So both of my grandparents got on boats and were told to go back, and were told to get off. So I'm going to say it again. There sometimes are miracles that we don't even know that we're supposed to pray for, because we can't pray for the impossible. But the fact that we're here today, and the fact that we survived, the fact that my grandparents survived, the fact that my mother was born, all of this is based upon God doing miracles within miracles. And for that, we're extremely, extremely grateful.